Well, one way that you can fight back against police brutality is by recording it when it's actually taking place. You could take out your smartphone and film it. However, even though the Supreme Court in Illinois struck down a law that would make it illegal to film cops as they're doing their jobs, turns out that lawmakers in the state are still trying to revive that law by making a few changes and making it a lot more vague. That way, you will be a little more intimidated when you consider filming a cop while they are in the process of arresting someone, okay? So according to reports, the bill would make it a felony to record any private conversation, which it defines as any oral communication between two or more persons where at least one person is involved or one person involved had a reasonable expectation of privacy. So the part of this that is vague is the reasonable expectation portion of it, because the bill does not explain what reasonable expectation means. So it's open for interpretation. And some people who are analyzing this bill are saying that it was left vague intentionally. That way it would confuse people and it would just deter people from filming cops, because if you do get caught and you do get prosecuted for it, you could be charged and convicted of a felony and you can serve time behind bars for it.
I have a tough time believing that part of the story. Not that the bill is obviously real, but and his interpretation is going to be that applies to the cops or it doesn't apply to the cops, and then we're going to know. You can't get cute and write the legislation in a way that's going to deter people from shooting from shooting video, because at some point that's going to be determined.
But what if it goes in front of a grand jury instead of a judge, and the grand jury, here's the law, grand jury, okay.
Right, but then it's going to go to trial and the judge is going to determine it. I mean, it might scare off a couple of people, but as soon as that bill becomes law, then we're going to know whether it applies to cops or not. If you were seriously interested in protecting citizens' rights, though, to videotape police officers in the act, you would write the law the exact way it is and then say the exception is if you're shooting public servants in the process of doing their job, and then there'd be an exception for shooting police, and then there'd be no ambiguity at all.
Yeah.
Yes.
That wouldn't be hard. So do we know the people behind it are serious? Are they trying to protect cops? Is that what this effort is?
Well, here are a few things about this that I found really interesting. First of all, this was actually put onto a completely different piece of legislation that had absolutely nothing to do with surveilling police officers, right? So it was tacked onto another bill only a few days before members of the House voted on it and members of the Senate in Illinois voted on it, okay? So that was a little problematic because it's unclear as to whether or not the lawmakers really knew what they were voting on. But nonetheless, they voted overwhelmingly in favor of this legislation. Right now, the governor of Illinois just has to sign it and it'll become law. It passed 106-7 in the state house and also 46-4 in the Senate. So they were largely in favor of it, but again, it's kind of unclear as to whether or not they knew the specifics of this and whether or not they knew that this was tacked on to a different piece of legislation last minute. But another portion of this is, I don't even think that you need to have a reasonable expectation of privacy for it to be considered unjustified. I think that when you're dealing with a cop and you think that something shady is going on, that's someone that's being paid with our tax dollars, right? You should be able to film them if you think that there's some wrongdoing happening, right? This is a public servant. So why do you have to even have a question about reasonable expectation of privacy? If they're on the job and you are dealing with some sort of interaction with a cop, you should be able to film them. I don't care about privacy or not.
And the bigger question is, so cops expect to be able to police our country and our neighborhoods in private?
Right. That doesn't make any sense. They're public servants. That doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. You can't police a neighborhood. You can't police a community in secret. That's the whole thing.
I just have a tough time buying that this is what could possibly happen here. I mean, first of all, we're talking about there's a federal effort to put cameras on cops, right?
Yeah.
I mean, here's what people don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy: if their every action is being recorded already.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no expectation of privacy at all. So that said, it's certainly worth following, and it's an interesting story, and I would be stunned if it were interpreted this way. That's got a lot of constitutional hoops to get through.
And one final portion of this is the consequences that you'll face if you are caught filming a cop when he has a reasonable expectation of privacy. So according to the bill, it would also discourage people from recording conversations with police by making unlawfully recording a conversation with police or an attorney general, assistant attorney general, state's attorney, assistant state's attorney, or judge a Class 3 felony, which creates a sentence of 2 or 4 years in prison. Meanwhile, the bill makes a legal recording of a private citizen a Class 4 felony, which carries a lower sentencing range of 1 to 3 years in prison. I think that right there is a little telling, right? Because it shows you who they're trying to protect. They don't really care about private citizens as much. It's a different felony. It's a Class 4 felony as opposed to a Class 3 felony.
I'm also reading this more carefully this second time through, and it only requires one person to have the reasonable expectation of privacy. So you could make it that the person being arrested by the cop had the reasonable expectation of privacy.
Right.
So it's a bad law. It's already been struck down once by the Illinois Supreme Court. They changed it a little. It strikes me as that it will be struck down again. I'm a little surprised. I'm surprised at anything that passed, as you said, Anna, 106-7 in the House and 46-4. I mean, the Democrats and Republicans in the Illinois State House are not that united in protecting the cops. They're not that united in anything. I'm not saying it wouldn't have passed, but that bill would have been closer.